Tim is going to talk about the United States peace movement. The United States peace movement is pretty diverse, somewhat fragmented, but he is the chief exec of Nuclear Ban US. And he also knows us very well. He's been in Scotland. He was at the Festival for Survival. He was one of our speakers at the Festivals for Survival. He knows quite a lot about the Scottish peace movement and the UK peace movement, and so is well placed to speak to us.
As you all know, the situation in the US is different. As Lynn said, it's diverse and fragmented, and that's the least you can say about it. But just a bit of background for myself. I mean, I know some of you, but I was born in the US, but I grew up in the north of Scotland in Bavshire. I went to Aberdeen University, and I spent most of my life in the UK, in England, including 7 years outside the RAF Molesworth cruise missile base back in the 80s. And so I've only just come back to the US fairly recently. And so my reflections about the peace movement in the US and where we are with that is partly colored by the fact that I don't know it as well. You know, I'm coming to it as you would, really. And so you can share some of my shock and horror at some of the things that I've experienced in the peace movement here. Just to start with, you know, as Lynn said, it's very diverse. It's a huge country, as you know, and so there are all kinds of organizations here, including the ones that Marion mentioned that are in Germany, like the Pax Christi, which is the Catholic movement, the Fellowship of Reconciliation, the War Resisters. There's also very strong Veterans for Peace, as there is in the UK. There are many organizations, and the largest one is Peace Action, which is just celebrating its, I think, 66th anniversary or something. I mean, it's the equivalent of C&D in some ways, but it grew out of the Freeze campaign of the 1980s, which grew out of the SANE movement of the 60s. And so it's fairly conservative in terms of its policies. I have to say, the biggest shock I had was after the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was agreed back in 2017, and Janet Fenton and I were out there celebrating on the streets of New York City. I started going around to visit U.S. peace organizations, and literally none of them were interested. I mean, the first thing that I was told is, well, the U.S., not one single member of the U.S. Congress is ever going to support this treaty. You're wasting your time. The ship has sailed. The train has left the station. It's a non-starter. I mean, we heard all these phrases over and over again. And other people were saying, well, we're working on baby steps. The best we can get is, to get the U.S. to agree to no first use of nuclear weapons and things like that. And I realized that, there's partly because this is such a big country, people are just very discouraged and cynical, and there's this sort of, you're not being realistic, you're being naive, you're being utopian, you can't get rid of nuclear weapons, full stop. That's what I got from the peace movement, let alone from outside the peace movement. You can't get rid of nuclear weapons. Well, as I've read on a poster, don't let realism get in the way of what you have to do. And all of the sort of pessimism and cynicism and realism, so-called, is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, if you don't believe you can achieve these things, you're certainly not going to. So we don't let that get in the way. And, I did go around the country talking to peace groups about the treaty and trying to get support. I went to our own member of Congress here. His name is Jim McGovern. I don't know how many of you know about Ed Markey, for instance. So he's a senator from Massachusetts. Massachusetts is an island of sanity in a sea of insanity. But Ed Markey is our senator, and his claim to fame was speaking at the rally in 1982 to 1 million people in not Hyde Park, but Central Park in New York City, against nuclear weapons. I mean, that was the biggest demonstration in U.S. history. And but it was 40 years ago or something. And he's put in bills. He's got all these bills in Congress. And again, these are, this is a difference in, there's lots of differences in terms of the political system, but, anybody can put a bill in. So he's got all these bills. His latest bill is to keep AI from having control of US nuclear weapons, which of course would be a disaster. And it's great that we don't want AI to be in charge of our nuclear weapons. But I mean, it's such a long way from saying, like, we got to get rid of these things. The US, like the UK, signed the NPT over 50 years ago and committed legally to eliminating these nuclear weapons and working for the elimination. And they've made these promises ever since then, unequivocal undertaking to do this in good faith at an early date. All these terms that they've promised, even under Trump. The U.S. had to say these things. They had to put them out when they met at the UN. They have to put them in their nuclear posture reviews and so on. We're working towards a world without nuclear weapons, as Obama famously said. They all say that. They don't all get the Nobel Peace Prize for it, but they all have to say that because that's what they're legally bound to. And yet, when it comes down to it, there's just no interest, none. And so Ed Markey, who I was talking about, the senator, puts in bill after bill. He's got a bill that says, the U.S. should go back to the table and renegotiate the START treaty. He's got a bill saying, as I said, we don't want AI to be involved in the nuclear decision making. All great things. We don't want to spend. He's got a bill called HALT, which is about halting the SANE bill, which is about saving our nuclear expenditure. So cutting the nuclear budget, not eliminating it, just cutting it a bit. All these bills fall short of saying we've got to get rid of these nuclear weapons, full stop. And we've confronted him in public meetings, and he won't say it. He won't support the treaty. He won't say we got to get rid of these weapons, even though the U.S. is committed to that. So that's what we're up against. And it took us over a year to get our own Representative Jim McGovern on board, because he was not willing to go against Ed Markey, for example. He's now one of our strongest supporters in Congress for the TPNW. He's coming to the meeting that Marion was talking about, that's happening in a week. He's the only member of Congress who's coming, but it's great that we've got one. And we'll keep working on that. We have 11 members of Congress now who support the treaty and call for the U.S. to sign it, but that's such a small number. We have another 30 or so who have said the U.S. should embrace the treaty. No, not even embrace the treaty, embrace the goals and provisions of the treaty, whatever that means. They don't call on the U.S. to sign the treaty, just embrace it, like, liking it on Facebook or something. I don't really know what that's supposed to mean. But we're working to try to change this, and it's an uphill struggle. There is Marion is involved with, behind her screen you can see the signs that says Nuke Watch, which is where she is. So Nuke Watch is one of the many groups around the country that does support the treaty, and we have now a nuclear ban treaty collaborative, which consists of, I don't know if Mary knows the number. I think it's like 60 or more organizations around the country. It's mostly small ones. And by the way, nuclearban.us, which I'm representing, is pretty small. We're in Massachusetts, which, as I said, is a little island of sanity. Wisconsin is not one of those islands, unfortunately, but there are a few. I mean, there are pockets even in Wisconsin that are sane, but we're living in a crazy country here. And but the Nuclear Ban Treaty Collaborative brings together all these little organizations that do support the treaty, and we had a great national event on the day that the treaty entered into force. So that was almost 3 years ago now. People all over the U.S. joined. I'm sure you did the same thing in Scotland. Had people protests at nuclear bases, people getting arrested, but also just people standing out with signs and placards and banners, calling attention to the treaty. because nobody, the vast majority of Americans have no idea about any of this. So it's about education. So there's the Ban Treaty Collaborative. And then, we tried to set up, we only set up, I have to say, one of the features of the United States peace movement, Lynn said, it's not only diverse, but also fragmented. It's a very individualistic country. Everybody wants to do their own thing. And that means that, organizations just splinter into more and more organizations. And I'm afraid I'm a prime example of that because, as I said, we went around the country trying to find support for the treaty and wanting to work with other groups, and nobody was willing to work with us. So we started nuclearban.us, and we built our own campaign from that. We got, as I said, 11 members of Congress on board. We've got a lot more support from staff and so on in Congress, but we've also been working at the state level, at the city level, getting ICANN cities on board, getting more signatures to the ICANN pledge. We've got nowhere near the number of cities or parliamentarians that Germany has, or Scotland, but we're working on it as best we can, and we have pockets of support all around the country. We have a lot in Northern California, some in Wisconsin, a lot in Minnesota, some more in Maine and Pennsylvania and New Jersey and Maryland. But it's a big country, and it's hard. So Lynn wanted to sort of wanted me to talk about what are lessons for Scottish C&D, and what can you learn from what we're doing in the US, and that's hard to think about because the situations are so different, but there are some similarities. And one of them is about age. Those of you who are at the those of you who are on screen right now, and those of you who are at the Festival for Survival, if you look around the room, you'll see a lot of white hair, and we're all getting on in age. Not all, but the majority of us. And that's certainly the case in the U.S. The U.S. peace movement is mostly over 60, and there's very few young people involved. Young people are very committed to the climate crisis, and also right now to Gaza. I have to say, they're out on the streets when there's other issues. Black Lives Matter. When there's a shooting by police of a black person, people are out on the streets. Young people. Same with Gaza. But their main issue is climate, and climate is just as urgent and just as important as the nuclear issue, and we all know that, and that's why you had that built into the Festival for Survival. But how we work with climate groups and how we attract young people is a hugely crucial issue, in my opinion. We've set up here the Warheads to Windmills Coalition to try to work directly with climate groups and to make the issues of equal importance. So as well as the peace movement being fragmented and diverse, the same is true with the climate movement in this country. I'm very active in our local Climate Action Now group, which is not part of the state Climate Action Now for whatever reason. I don't really know, but there's differences of policy and opinion, and there's all kinds of these differences. But there are some big organizations like there are in the UK. XR, Extinction Rebellion, is a really important group to work with because they're people that know that we're facing an existential threat to humanity, and we've got to take action. It's no good talking about baby steps when the world is on fire. So we're trying to work more with Extinction Rebellion, with the young people's organizations like Sunrise Movement. I don't know if this exists in the UK, but that was started also in Massachusetts by a young person from just straight out of university. And it's, they're the ones that, go occupy offices in Congress and say, we're not leaving until you support the Green New Deal and things like that. They're very active. They're a great group. Fridays for a Future, which is Greta Thunberg's group. They're even younger. They're high school students, secondary school. We're trying to work with them too. But there are loads of other groups. There's 350.org. We have groups in the US like Sierra Club. Sierra Club is a very huge. I mean, they've got 2 million members. They're very conservative in many ways, but they're partners of ICANN, which I don't understand, but they are. And so we're trying to, we haven't got them totally on board yet, but they're partners of ICANN. They've signed on to our letter to President Biden calling on him to sign the treaty. So, we're working with them. Greenpeace is another one, really important group internationally. They started out as an anti-nuclear weapons campaign, and they're much more focused on climate now, but they still have the nuclear weapons on their agenda. So we're trying to work with them. And we're, as I said, the key that we've found is, we have to treat climate as urgent and as important as the nuclear weapons. Otherwise, they're not going to just join us. We have to be working on their issue as well as our issue, which is, of course, a lot. It's one existential threat is enough for one person, and two is, it's hard work. As some of you know, we've just published a book. I'm really excited about it. We've had earlier versions. It's called Warheads to Windmills, and that's the name of our coalition and the name of our campaign and the name of the book and the name of the summary. But I just wanted to point out some of the things that are in there, which are ways that we can relate more strongly to the climate movement. So, for instance, I mentioned about the baby steps and the no first use campaign and all these things that the peace movement in the US focuses on because they don't think we can ever get rid of nuclear weapons. And the same is true with the climate movement. There was, I don't know if you all know about the Beyond Coal campaign, but, coal in the US, coal is the worst of the fossil fuels for sure. But the Beyond Coal campaign was about closing down coal-fired power stations and replacing them with gas-fired stations. Well, gas is also a fossil fuel. And so although it's less polluting than coal, you're never, ever going to get rid of fossil fuel burning if you just move from coal to gas. So it's kind of a similar challenge, for the climate movement to get away from these half measures and false solutions and, what we call them now is problematic approaches to climate. We have the same thing with nuclear weapons, people that don't think we can get rid of them altogether, so they focus on these other steps. But there's also been all kinds of other ways in which the climate movement has been diverted or focused on things other than saying, we are in an existential threat to humanity. We have to address this. We have to do it now, and we have to do it by getting rid of these weapons and these burning of fossil fuels. And nothing short of that is good enough. We can't, we have to just keep at it. And it may be unrealistic, and that's what we have to do. So I think that's my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you.